I don't know what happened.
Before The Last of Us Part 2 was released, but after we had finished playing it and long after some of its plot had leaked online, we interviewed the game's director and lead co-writer Neil Druckmann. We spent the first half of the interview discussing spoiler-free aspects of the game leading up to its launch. You can click the link above to hear some highlights from that. But the second half was all about breaking down the game's full storyline and radical structure with its creative lead. So let's go over some of the interesting little details that came out of this second spoiler-heavy part of our chat. And, fair warning, you should only keep watching this video if you've already finished the game. Still with us? Great, let's get stuck in.
Made it. You found the Firefly. Because of her, they were actually going to make a cure.
So, as you'll know if you've finished the game, The Last of Us Part 2 is mostly told from the perspective of two people, Ellie and Abby. Very early on in the game, Abby and her group of friends murder Joel in front of Ellie to avenge Abby's father, the surgeon at the end of the first game who Joel killed to stop Ellie from being dissected in the name of finding a cure for the fungal infection that turns people into mindless killers. They incapacitate Joel's brother Tommy and Ellie, but otherwise don't harm them. And once the two return to Jackson, they are understandably thirsty for revenge. You then play as Ellie as she sets off with her girlfriend Dina, tracking down Abby's group one by one and killing them in increasingly cold-blooded and vicious ways. Once Ellie and Abby come face to face again 3 days later in a Seattle theatre, the game rewinds and puts you in Abby's shoes for the same 3 days. Killing Joel didn't bring her the peace that she thought it would, but Abby finds purpose again in protecting two young members of a religious cult who have been driven out and are on the run for their lives.
You killed my friends.
So let's break it down. The rewind that happens roughly halfway into the game is both clever and cruel in that the first half has you angrily seeking vengeance for a person you loved, attacking these monsters who wronged you. The second half, after you've murdered these people, lets you actually get to know them and see the complexity of their lives. It makes you feel uncomfortably shameful and guilty for dehumanizing them so easily. When we asked Neil Druckmann about it, he said, "You mentioned shame and guilt. Those are things that are uniquely video gamey, right? It's like I just committed those acts. I am complicit in those acts. And now I get to see the consequences of those acts by empathizing with these other people." You know, in marketing the game, we talk about it one way, but really, the game is about something different. We say it's a game about hate, but that's not true. It's a game about empathy. It's a game about forgiveness. The whole thing was constructed in such a way as to say, in the beginning of the game, we're going to make you feel such intense hate that you can't wait to find these people and make them pay. And that's the stuff that you're seeing online. You'll have seen some of the leaks. The way that they've dehumanized Abby and the way that they're talking about Abby, it's kind of horrifying. And yet, it's completely human. It's what we do. We've seen this time and time again, he continued. We watch interviews of parents that have lost their child or someone they love to violence. They say, if I could get my hands on the person responsible, I will skin them alive. And I believe them. I believe that under the right circumstances, normal human beings are capable of that. So the exploration with this game is, like, how can we start with that state and then make you reflect on it?
I do okay.
Are you fucking kidding me?
You're welcome, kiddo.
I'm not doing this.
The journey that we go on with both Ellie and Abby is an often uncomfortable but always fascinating one. Even though you'll start off rooting for Ellie and absolutely hating Abby, as Neil touched on there, the game will challenge you on this position many times up until their final face-off at the end of the game, where a hate-filled and desperate Ellie forces the starved and beaten down Abby to fight her, despite the fact that Abby has overpowered and spared Ellie twice already, and now just wants to escape to safety with Lev. Their fight is a bitter, hollow thing. There's no glory or vindication in it, and you feel like Ellie, for the sake of everyone still alive, should just walk away. For me, hero and villain is too much of a judgment for the way we approached it, Druckmann answered. The way he saw it, the team said, here are a bunch of flawed characters that make flawed choices and have to deal with those choices. Can you come back from that? Ellie's story is the quest of trying to fill this hole that was left when Joel died, he went on. And thinking with each death, maybe if I make it more like what they did to him. So each death gets more and more brutal and takes away more and more of her humanity. It's this empty pursuit. And again, this is based on real interviews we watched with someone that, let's say, has a person that did their family wrong and then that person is executed. Capital punishment. And the interviewee after is like, it didn't solve anything. The person didn't come back. And then the Abby journey is one of redemption, he continued. She's dedicated the past 5 years to finding and killing Joel. She's made herself into this weapon. She's imagining he's this larger-than-life person. He's like the devil in her mind. And you can see that. This group is terrified of this man, even after they shoot his leg off. They're terrified of him. They're shaking. And then it's this kind of pathetic thing, the way he dies. It's not satisfying in any way. It's just sad. So then it's exploring what her redemption is after that. Her redemption is saving these kids from a group that she's been locked in war with and she's killed who knows how many dozens of. That's where she finds purpose. That's a positive thing. With that final fight, our hope, and I know there's going to be people out there that feel different ways, our hope was you're rooting for both characters. Ellie kind of gets to the same point, almost like where Abby was, where she has certain expectations of what this fight is going to be. And actually, it's way more pathetic than that. Abby is not the same person that killed Joel. This is a person that has suffered and has found redemption. And you, as a player, have the full context for both characters. And you understand how futile this fight is.
Oh. Just take him.
The saddest thing about that fight, for me, Aoife anyway, is it didn't have to happen. It doesn't bring Ellie any kind of real closure, and it ends up costing her everything. Dina and baby JJ pack up and leave her, and with her missing fingertips, Ellie can't play guitar, and that special connection that she had with Joel is severed. She's lost. The song that Ellie tries to play at the end of the game is the one that Joel sings and plays for her at the start of the game. It's Future Days by Pearl Jam. We asked Druckmann why they chose that song in particular, especially since it almost didn't fit with The Last of Us's timeline.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself.
It's actually kind of a weird story, he answered. When we finished the first game, Jeff Keighley reached out to us. He wanted to do The Last of Us One Night Live, where we would bring the actors on stage and they would act out scenes from the game. Now I thought, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but maybe there's a way to take advantage of it and just write something unique for the stage. I'm gonna have Troy and Ashley there. What if we could explore a scene after the events of the first game? So I wrote this scene where Joel brings this guitar to Ellie. There's this tension between them, and there's a song. Now, I am obsessed with Pearl Jam and just in love with the song, so I checked the timeline. It actually hadn't come out before the outbreak. But there were live performances on YouTube of Eddie Vedder performing the song, so it's possible that Joel could have learned it. But once we had made that scene and put it out there, I felt that's the opening for the game. I know that's the opening of The Last of Us Part 2.
There you go.
Well, that didn't suck. Hey, Alice. Hey. You want to pet her? It's okay. Yeah, see?
We also spoke to Druckmann about Lev, one of the young runaway Seraphites that Abby risks her life to protect after being saved by Lev and his sister Yara when the three are attacked by the cult in Seattle. Over the course of their time together, Abby learns that Lev is transgender, and the reason he and his sister are being hunted by the cult is because they don't accept him for who he is. Now, the reaction to Lev's story in the trans community has been mixed, with some people fairly critiquing the game for dead-naming Lev, that is, having the Seraphites refer to him by his old name, a generally hurtful and very unpleasant experience for a trans person, and also having the story define his character by his trauma and suffering. Now, there are arguments to be made for the fact that Lev otherwise gets to tell his story on his own terms, that every character in the game suffers horribly, and that Abby never once questions his identity. But these are valid concerns. Nevertheless, many players found Lev's story arc to be a powerful and touching one. I asked Druckmann whether the studio had consulted trans people when crafting Lev's story. Yes, he said. We also hired a religious consultant. We were like, okay, we're going to make a religion here. Let's at least make sure we know the minefield we're entering and what the things that might offend people are. Our thing was, you can't make a piece of art that's this challenging, that's not going to offend someone, but let's at least be thoughtful and mindful, so we know the narrative choices are there in service of the story. He continued, we have actually quite a few transgender people on the team that we were constantly talking with. We read a lot of books, we watched interviews, we brought a consultant in to walk us through a lot of that stuff. And then, once we had filled our mind with that stuff, it's like, okay, now we have to forget all that and just treat them like a character, like another person in this world. It's not diversity for the sake of it, he went on. Like, okay, let's have a trans character so we can just check off that box. No, that actually became a really interesting thing to explore within a religion. Here's someone that is hunted by people that are following this religion, and yet he's still religious, spiritual. He just interprets the material differently. That's what diversity gets us, a fresh perspective. It's a new way to look at the story.
Do you remember the joke?
What is the downside to eating a clock? It's time-consuming.
Finally, I had to ask Druckmann what Joel and Ellie's actors, Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, thought of their characters' stories in The Last of Us Part 2. Druckmann laughed and replied, I remember the first time I pitched it to Ashley. It was right after I pitched her Left Behind. We were in a restaurant and she was moved by that. And we're about ready to shoot and I was like, oh, by the way, I have this other concept, this rough outline for what I think the sequel could be. And she was just like sobbing. But she loved it. And I think Troy, in that same way, look, the material was challenging even for them. I've seen people say online, basically, you disrespected the characters. Motherfuckers, no one loves these characters more than we do. Except for maybe Troy Baker. No one loves Joel more than Troy Baker. On the surface, I could see fans of the first game being repelled by this, but if they dive in and they see the heart of it, it's like Joel is throughout the whole story. You feel his presence through every beat of that story because his actions, his relationship with Ellie, permeate throughout the whole thing. And you see that in those flashbacks and in that final moment where Ellie is really reflecting about forgiveness. That final conversation that they had where she felt that he wronged her in such a way she was ready to be done with him. And yet, she was able to let it go. And I think that's Ellie's humanity, the core that is still good within her, despite all these hard choices.
I like that.
And I think that shows in the final game. What do you reckon? Did Naughty Dog hit the mark with the sequel, and can you see scope for a part 3? What would that even look like? Let us know in the comments, and keep those comments kind and respectful, please. And while we have you, you can also check out our Let's Play in progress for The Last of Us Part 2. Or you can watch my review of the game by clicking on the links on screen now. Thanks for watching. Bye!